Now, when this government first took office after the historic 9th May general election, investors had questions about the direction of this country, even as ordinary Malaysians were celebrating the political change. Whilst our actions have answered some of these questions, some perhaps still linger. This conference is designed to provide greater clarity to domestic and international investors about our plans to push Malaysia forward and achieve the country's previously unfulfilled potential and promises. Malaysia had in the past been labelled as an economic tiger, crouching, ready to pounce anytime. Those were the heady days of the 80s and the early 90s, when we were amongst the darling of investors, both local and foreign. However, it appears as if we have fallen asleep, crouching, never really fully attaining anywhere near our full potential. It is a shame because in 1970, data from the World Bank shows South Korean GNI per capita was only 76% of Malaysia. But by 2017, South Koreans were 3 times richer than Malaysians. Even more worryingly, Malaysian growth rate has been slower than its regional rivals. The 2017 Malaysian GDP per capita in US dollar terms was only 4 times larger than in 1990. In contrast, during the same period, Vietnam grew about 16 times, and China grew more than 26 times. Whilst Malaysia is no doubt richer than these two countries in per capita terms now, there is a real danger that these two countries could overtake Malaysia if we remain complacent. There is no question that Malaysia remains a country with immense potential, still largely untapped. It is the objective of the new Pakatan Harapan government to finally unleash this potential and allow Malaysians and all of you investors out there to uncover the hidden dividends. To this end, I will start off by touching on the global environment and challenges, and of course, the way forward. Now, Malaysia is a small, open, and highly diversified economy. We are deeply integrated with the global economy and international financial markets. When discussing Malaysia's economic prospects, there is no running away from looking at global developments, both the good and the bad. Global expansion is expected to continue, with the IMF projecting world economy to grow at 3.9% in 2018 and in 2019 at 3.7%. However, emerging market economies, including Malaysia, are facing a challenging global economic and financial environment. The US economy is expanding strongly, but growth in other major economies, such as the Eurozone, Japan, and UK, has begun to soften. For the emerging markets, China and emerging Asian economies continue to provide strong support to regional and global growth, while others that are mired in country-specific factors have seen their growth prospects being revised downwards. Against this backdrop of uneven global growth, downside risks have also intensified. Rising trade tensions between the US and its major trading partners are of significant concerns. Geopolitical risks have risen as international economic and diplomatic relations are being tested. These uncertainties have led to significant volatility in global financial markets amid continued monetary policy normalization in the US and tightening global financial conditions. As a result, the emerging markets have experienced large capital outflows and currency depreciation pressures. Some emerging markets have experienced worse than others, especially those that are viewed to have domestic vulnerabilities. The emerging markets are increasingly and perhaps unfairly being seen as a single asset class. Countries that exhibit similar vulnerability characteristics tend to be grouped together and therefore face similar or intensified capital outflow and currency depreciation pressures. While the spillovers have thus far been manageable, if there is anything we can learn from the Asian financial crisis, it is that contagion risks should not be taken lightly. Continued vigilance is warranted to guard against potential risks of contagion. Despite all these external headwinds, and not forgetting a change of government for the first time in 61 years, the Malaysian economy has proven to be incredibly resilient. Our strength can be seen from 6 factors. Firstly, the Malaysian economy is expected to remain on a steady growth path, driven by both domestic and external demand. While GDP growth is expected to moderate to around 5% for this year, Malaysia remains one of the fastest growing economies in the region. Secondly, we are a highly diversified economy. The services sector account for around 55% of GDP. Our exports are likewise diverse, with manufacturing exports accounting for more than 80% of our total exports. Thirdly, our favorable labor market conditions remain supportive of growth. This is evident from a low unemployment rate of 3.3% and firm private sector wage growth. The latter remains strong, registering a growth of 6.2% in the first half of 2018. Fourth, we continue to have a healthy current account surplus. Malaysia's current account surplus stood at 2.8% of GNI in the first half of 2018 and is expected to remain in surplus going forward. Even more positively, the goods surplus will continue to be supported by a highly competitive and diversified export sector. Fifth, Malaysia will continue to have in place a flexible exchange rate. The ringgit has evolved since the Asian financial crisis to become a fully flexible or a floating currency. Having this flexibility is advantageous to Malaysia as it allows the ringgit to play the role of a shock absorber during times of stress. Nevertheless, it is important for businesses to recognize that exchange rate adjustments are unavoidable, and we are ready to manage their currency exposures prudently. In the medium term, as the government continues to improve our economic fundamentals, the ringgit will eventually reflect these positive developments, and an independent bank negara will of course help to ensure confidence of currency stability. Sixth, we have continued to possess sufficient external buffers. Our external reserve position of $103.9 billion is adequate to facilitate international transactions. Furthermore, international reserves account for only a quarter of Malaysia's total external assets. Banks and corporations hold 3/4 of Malaysia's external assets as the end of second quarter 2018 of 1.3 trillion ringgit, which can also be drawn upon to meet the external debt obligations of 740.9 billion ringgit without creating a claim on international reserves. Our financial institutions are also very well capitalized, with more than sufficient liquidity to support intermediation within the economy. Perhaps more presciently, both business and consumer sentiments have been incredibly positive, reflecting positive outlook on the prospects of the domestic economy. The Consumer Sentiments Index, produced by the Malaysian Institute of Economic Research, MIER, rose to 132.9 points in the second quarter of 2018, from 91 points in the first quarter. This is the highest level recorded by the index since the 1997 Asian financial crisis. MIER also reported that the Business Conditions Index rose to 116.3 points, from 98.6 points on the same period, the highest for the past 13 quarters. More recently, the September Nikkei Malaysia Manufacturing Purchases Managers Index, PMI. These data signal the strongest improvement in Malaysian manufacturing conditions for 10 months, driven by a faster rate of job creation. HRS Market, which compiled this survey, said manufacturers added to their payrolls at a rate not since the opening month of the survey in July 2012. The reading remained above 50 in September, marking the first sequence of positive readings in 3.5 years. The trade conflict between China and the United States has also created a unique opportunity for Malaysia, where we are extremely well positioned to take advantage. In the recent months, anecdotal surveys have shown increased interest from Chinese manufacturers to diversify their production bases into Malaysia, as well as a means of gaining entry into both ASEAN and Western markets. At the same time, we see investors from OECD countries who have previously set up plants in China to shift part of their capacity here. We are not shy to highlight our multilingual strength in both English and Mandarin to navigate between the two largest economic giants in the world. This is on top Malaysia, geographically located at the heart of ASEAN, aided by Bahasa Melayu as our national language, being best placed to tap the fourth most populous region in the world. Indisputably, we have an established and diversified manufacturing and export ecosystem for both foreign and local investors to grow and tap. Our education levels, quality of hard and soft infrastructure, as well as the fluency in many languages, gives us the natural edge. At the same time, we remain significantly a cheaper investment destination than many other countries. As the government gets down to business, we will prioritize on policies that will positively contribute to the growth outlook. The diversified nature of our economy also ensures that we will be able to weather any shocks that arise. The government is also focusing on improving the well-being of the people. It is important to ensure that dividends from growth are shared more evenly and the efforts to protect vulnerable groups continue. With all these factors in mind, there is no reason why one should not be optimistic about the prospects of the new Malaysia. You would have been aware of the 1 trillion ringgit debts and liabilities that was first revealed by our Prime Minister. These debts and liabilities are the result of the previous administration's escalating ingenuity in adopting off-balance sheet financing for government expenses and financing over the past decade. These hidden debts, if left unchecked, without a change of government during the May elections, would have brought ruin to the country. While the creative off-balance sheet debts and spending by the previous administration were not entirely a surprise, we were taken completely off guard to discover that government revenues had also been overstated in the previous financial budgets to present a false picture of prudent fiscal consolidation. What the previous government had failed to account for and disclose was the snowballing GST and income tax outstanding refunds, which amounted to 35 billion ringgit as at May 2018. As painful as it may be, this money doesn't belong to the government, and this administration has made it a moral imperative to refund 35 billion ringgit back to companies and the people of Malaysia. The silver lining, however, is that this enormous refund exercise will certainly act as a major stimulus to our private consumption and investment. However, in this context, to quote our Prime Minister, the budget is of sacrifice. Everyone will have to sacrifice, and we have to accept that we must sacrifice. %24 only lah. The fiscal targets set by the previous administration are hence unrealistic in the short term, and it will be foolish for this government to maintain these targets. Over the medium term, however, we will remain strictly on the path of fiscal consolidation as we reform our institutions and processes, increase our revenues, optimize our expenditures, as well as rationalize our debts. Our new government is determined to clean up our accounts and make the public sector more transparent in its finances. For a start, we are committed to a shift from cash-based to accrual-based accounting standards by 2021. This move will involve a transition period of 5 to 7 years, will inculcate the necessary fiscal discipline in the current and future governments, ensuring that the excesses of the past will not repeat themselves. As part of our fiscal reforms to strengthen the government's fiscal position more systematically, we have established the Public Finance Committee, chaired by myself, the Minister of Economic Affairs, and the Governor of Bank Negara, as members of the Public Finance Committee, which will strike a balance between the government's commitments to fiscal consolidation and the government's needs to make continuous productive spending and investments. However, while it is imperative for the government to be prudent with our expenditure, we are equally cognizant that we must not fall into the austerity trap. What we want is merely to get a bigger bang for the buck, to make sure that every taxpayer's ringgit will generate the equivalent value and maximum multiplier effect. Hence, for clear-cut white elephant projects such as the multi-product pipeline and the Trans-Sabah pipeline projects expected to cost more than 10 billion ringgit has been cancelled. This is despite the fact that we have paid approximately 8.5 billion ringgit of the fees, even though less than 15% of the works have been completed on the total project. Surya Strategic Energy Resources, the project owner, which is wholly owned by the Ministry of Finance, is now in the process to negotiate with the main contractor, China Petroleum and Pipeline Bureau, CPPB, to determine the compensation quantum and amount to be refunded to us. There are also many mega infrastructures which we recognize as crucial towards productivity and economic growth. They will include the rail-based public transport projects such as LRT3 and MRT2. For these projects, we have every intention of continuing, but we are committed to ensure that there are no unnecessary and excessive scope, while also ensuring that the cost is reasonable. Hence, for LRT3, we have successfully renegotiated with the main contractor and Syarikat Prasarana to reduce the overall cost of the project from 31.6 billion ringgit to 16.6 billion ringgit, a savings of 15 billion ringgit of 47%. As I announced 2 days earlier, we had also successfully renegotiated the total scope cost for the MRT2 above ground contracts to be reduced by 23%, from 22.6 billion ringgit to 17.4 billion ringgit, a savings of 5.2 billion ringgit. However, when we could not agree on the appropriate cost reduction for the MRT2 underground works portion, after receiving necessary feedback from independent consulting engineers, we had little choice but to conduct an international open tender for the balance of the works on the underground portion. It must be highlighted that these actions are intended not only to save costs, and we can expect more savings from MRT2 when the international tender for the underground portion is completed, but also to reduce the future debt and liabilities of the Malaysian government. A lower cost of construction means improved viability for the public transport system, lower ticket prices, and higher passenger traffic. Ladies and gentlemen, this new government believes that the business of government is not to be in business. Hence, in the coming years, you will see a slew of programs designed in part to unleash the full potential of the private sector. Whilst the previous administration only talked about a private sector-led market economy, the new administration will walk the talk. We have heard numerous complaints from investors and businessmen alike that our capital markets are too illiquid, controlled effectively by several government-linked investment corporations. This has resulted in a MSCI emerging markets weightage of only 2.5%. Let me repeat what I said. We heard you. We will reduce the government's direct participation in the equity ownership of companies so that the private sector can take the lead. For listed entities, this will definitely lead to higher average daily volumes for Bursa, whilst improving market liquidity. Of course, I will also be honest, as I promised to be an honest finance minister. We hope to kill two birds with one stone, unleashing the power of the private sector and reduce the crowding out effect caused by government investment. In addition, we will also be able to gradually realize the value of government-owned assets and utilize these proceeds to pay down our debt obligations. At the same time, our government will play our role as the single largest buyer in the country to promote efficiency and competitiveness of the private sector. As an example, previously an overwhelming majority of public-private partnership projects were discovered to be directly negotiated. Contractors carry out government projects such as building affordable homes, schools, police stations, fire stations, and army camps in exchange for government land instead of being paid in cash. But unfortunately, they were negotiated directly. So we do not know what is the real cost of the public projects or the real value of the government land sold in exchange. Under such opaque terms, corruption, extraordinary profits to crony companies, poor returns on investment, and increasing government debt load was the order of the day. Such a direct negotiated process perverted the model of PPP, public-private partnership, into a privatization exercise of crony capitalism. Through direct negotiation, the real value of government land was invariably underpriced, whilst the cost of public works were overpriced. The new true PPP model, or what our term has PPP 2.0 for Malaysia, would decouple the land swap by carrying out open auctions for the land to be sold, while at the same time executing an open tender for the project to be built. This will enable the government to achieve the highest revenue for the asset disposed while receiving the best value for the project to be awarded. The new model will be applied for all PPP projects that are still awaiting approval, as well as any projects in the future. There will be no cancellation of PPP projects. They will be continued, but under a different format and mechanism. Through this process, the private sector will be revitalized, as land assets can be sold to entities who are best able to maximize returns from their investment on the property, while projects will go to companies who are most competitive and competent. These are some of the examples of how we intend to allow the private sector to flourish and drive economic growth in Malaysia. I will certainly spend some more time elaborating on these initiatives and collaboration on how we can leverage on one another to bring back the raw of the Malaysian tiger. And of course, we are even willing to make government investments and allow the private sector to run it, provided that the maintenance cost is borne by the private sector and we can get value out of the successful running of these projects. Over the long term, our focus is to ensure that we will have sufficient and stable sources of revenue for the country's development. With this in mind, we have established the Tax Reform Committee to undertake a comprehensive review and reform of the overall tax system. The Tax Reform Committee has been given the mandate to minimize the tax gap, diversify the tax revenue, and make the tax system more efficient, neutral, and progressive. It is also tasked to explore ways to minimize tax leakages and evasion. The same committee will review all tax incentives given out previously to ensure that these measures are still relevant in supporting high-quality economic growth. And of course, our Prime Minister revealed some additional tax measures, which will be announced in my upcoming budget speech on November the 2nd. To realize our potential, we are committed to fiscal sustainability, strengthening our resilience, achieving a sustainable and equitable growth for Malaysia, forging an entrepreneurial state, and improving the economic well-being of the rakyat. These are our main obstacles towards reclaiming our position as an Asian tiger. Improving the well-being of the rakyat is basically about increasing their real incomes and higher purchasing power. Growth can only be sustainable if it is a private sector-led growth. Forging an entrepreneurial state will require collaboration from the main stakeholders, principally a 4P partnership comprising the public domains, private sector, professional bodies, and the people. Fortunately, despite the severe strains caused by the 1MDB scandals, our economic fundamentals are still sound, and Malaysia do not suffer from twin deficits, but will continue to enjoy a current account surplus. The monetary sector is robust, with banks enjoying low NPLs and well capitalized, with the capital market also stable. In the interest of transparency, fiscal consolidation will not be achieved easily, and we must be willing to expect some pain and even offer some sacrifice. We will need at least around 3 years to resolve the fiscal issues caused by the 1 trillion ringgit debt and the 35 billion GST and income tax refunds. And we believe that institutional reforms will allow the Malaysian economy and investors to see clarity, certainty, and confidence in the system. This will not be easy, may even be difficult for some, but I believe that it can be done. After all, it is always the darkest just before dawn. The new dawn in Malaysia after the 9th of May 2018 will not result in the same old. Instead, it will be viewed in history as an inflection point which brought good governance and key institutional, political, and economic reforms which will transform the nation. Only then, this crouching tiger will be crouching no more. Thank you very much.